Stephen Curry had just wrapped up a grueling practice session at the Golden State Warriors training facility, the sweat still damp on his brow as he made his way to the bus stop. It had been one of those days. Long hours on the court, intense drills, and a coach pushing him to refine every detail of his already refined game. His body felt heavy, his muscles sore from the constant physical demands of being a professional athlete, yet his mind raced with the thoughts of the next game, the next challenge. Phyllis's appeared as they walked with the crowd, hoping to reach the goal. As he stepped onto the bus, the familiar noise of the crowded vehicle filled his ears. The sound of voices, the click of smartphones, and the rustling of papers created a dull backdrop to his exhaustion. He found an empty seat near the back and sank into it, grateful for the few moments of respite. His eyes closed briefly, letting the hum of the bus soothe his mind. But as the bus made its way through the city's streets, something caught his attention. An elderly woman stepped onto the bus at the next stop. She was slow, frail, her steps unsteady as she moved down the aisle. Stephen could see the strain in her face as she scanned the bus, likely searching for a place to sit. But every seat was taken. People around her were too engrossed in their own worlds, too distracted by their phones to notice the elderly woman standing precariously. Stephen watched her for a moment longer, feeling a pang of discomfort. She clearly needed help. Without a second thought, he stood up. His muscles protested a bit, but the exhaustion was outweighed by something else: compassion. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his voice soft but clear. "You can have my seat." The woman looked up in surprise, her eyes widening as she processed the kindness. She smiled, a small but grateful gesture, and limped slowly towards the vacant seat. Stephen helped her settle in, his hand briefly brushing her shoulder as she sat down with a sigh of relief. As the bus continued its journey, Stephen stood by the door, his tired legs now aching even more. But he didn't mind. Something in him had shifted in that moment. It wasn't the first time he had offered someone his seat, but today the act felt different. There was a quiet sense of fulfillment in knowing that, even in his own exhaustion, he had made someone's day a little bit easier. When he reached his stop a few minutes later, he gave a brief nod to the elderly woman before stepping off the bus. It wasn't until he was walking down the street that he felt a small but significant sensation in his jacket pocket. Reaching in, he pulled out a folded piece of paper. Confused, he unfolded it and read the handwritten note inside. It was an address, followed by a strange 5-digit code. Stephen's curiosity piqued, but there was no time to ponder it further. He had already made his way home, his thoughts lingering on the note, more than the practice he had just completed. Little did he know, this simple act of kindness would be the beginning of something far bigger than he could have ever imagined. After Stephen Curry stepped off the bus, the day's exhaustion began to settle in. He had barely made it a few steps down the sidewalk when he reached into his jacket pocket, feeling a strange crinkling inside. His hand pulled out a small folded piece of paper, one he hadn't noticed before. It was slightly creased, almost as though it had been hastily slipped inside without much thought. Puffing on the wind, he hooked his thumb between its pages, left it stiff enough to disappear inside, wiped the soil away with his handkerchief, and walked. He paused for a moment, staring at the paper, wondering if it had been accidentally placed there by someone else. Unfolding it carefully, he found an address scrawled across one side, followed by a set of 5 numbers. Strange, almost like a code. 5 Queen Street, code 88687. Stephen looked at the note in confusion. There was no name, no explanation, just a cryptic address and a string of numbers that seemed out of place. His mind immediately went to work, trying to figure out its significance. Had the elderly woman given him the wrong note by mistake? Or was this some kind of message meant for him? The would-be criminal was shy and hesitant, but he could see his way clear, down along the street, towards the park. The oddness of it lingered as he continued walking, but he pushed it aside for the moment. His mind was too tired to unravel mysteries, and all he wanted was to get home and rest. But sleep wouldn't come easily. The note kept him awake, swirling in his thoughts like a puzzle that begged to be solved. It was an address, but what did the code mean? Stephen had no idea, but something inside him urged him to find out. Perhaps it was his natural curiosity, or perhaps it was the oddity of the situation that gnawed at him. The next day, he found himself back on the bus, hoping to see the elderly woman again, hoping to understand what the note meant, because she was nowhere to be found. He checked the bus every day for the next few days, but she never appeared. With a growing sense of mystery, Stephen decided to take action. On his day off, he set out to visit the address on the note. He wasn't sure what to expect, but a strange sense of purpose drove him forward. When the bus reached Queen Street, he stepped off, looking around the area for any sign of a home or building that might correspond to the address. There was nothing obvious, but as he walked further, the street began to change, becoming quieter and more secluded. After several minutes, he found himself standing in front of a large, imposing gate. It was surrounded by lush gardens, and at the far end of the property, a mansion stood, almost hidden from view. Something about the place felt peaceful yet mysterious. Stephen felt a sense of trepidation, unsure of what he was walking into. But his curiosity pushed him forward. He approached the gate and noticed a small panel with a keypad next to it. The security code, he thought. His heart raced as he pulled out the note and punched in the numbers 88687. The gate clicked open. Stephen hesitated, but only for a moment, before stepping into the compound. What was waiting for him behind that door? Would it answer his questions, or would it lead him deeper into a mystery he wasn't prepared for? As he walked toward the mansion, the uncertainty in his chest only grew. He was just a man, trying to make sense of something far larger than he could understand. But sometimes, in moments like this, it's the leap into the unknown that holds the greatest rewards. Stephen Curry couldn't shake the feeling of curiosity that had settled deep within him. The mysterious note from the elderly woman had wormed its way into his thoughts, and now, no matter how hard he tried to focus on other things, it lingered. The more he tried to push it aside, the more it consumed him. It wasn't just the strange address or the cryptic code that bothered him. It was the sheer randomness of it all. Why had she given him the note? Why him? The thought kept gnawing at him, especially after a few days of searching for the woman with no luck. She had disappeared from the bus, and Stephen hadn't seen her again. It was as if she disappeared altogether, leaving him frozen in doubt and despair. But the note. What was it about the note that wouldn't let him go? His mind kept returning to it, as though it held a secret, something important. It wasn't typical of him to fixate on such things. He was the kind of person who believed in moving forward, focusing on the present and what lay ahead. But this felt different. There was something about this that felt like an invitation, or maybe even a challenge. Stephen had been through difficult situations on and off the court, but none had made him question his own resolve quite like this. One evening, after practice, as he sat in his car staring at the note in his hand, it dawned on him. He was afraid of what might happen if he didn't follow through. He didn't know if the note would lead to something good or something dangerous, but not knowing was worse than knowing. And that, more than anything, spurred him to act. Screamed, grating against his eyelids and colliding with the meaningless signs and flickering hues of the night. The next morning, he woke up with a sense of determination. This wasn't just about finding the elderly woman. It was about solving a mystery that had been handed to him, as odd as that might sound. he felt an unusual pull to go to Queen Street, to find the address, and maybe, just maybe, uncover something that would change the course of his life. He even took the bus that day, his heart beating faster than usual. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, but he felt an undeniable connection to the mission. He couldn't help but think that the woman had put her trust in him for a reason, and that alone was enough to fuel his desire to find out what was at the end of this peculiar trail. He had no guarantees, no answers, but sometimes that was all it took. One moment of courage, one small act of belief that something greater was waiting beyond the next corner. As the bus stopped at Queen Street, he got off with a sense of clarity, his eyes scanning the area. The buildings and shops all looked so ordinary, yet he knew that something extraordinary was about to unfold. The air seemed charged with anticipation, as if everything in the universe had aligned to bring him to this very spot. He walked down the street, each step feeling purposeful, knowing that what he did next could change everything. And in that moment, he realized the journey itself had already begun. As Stephen Curry approached the address on Queen Street, his heart raced with a mix of excitement and uncertainty. The note in his pocket, still creased from his earlier handling, seemed heavier than ever. Each step he took toward the imposing estate at the end of the road felt like a leap into the unknown. He had no idea what he would find, but something told him that the journey was meant to be. The area was quiet, almost serene, with lush gardens and trees lining the pathway that led up to a large, ornate gate. The place looked nothing like the busy streets he was accustomed to. It felt out of time, as though it belonged to another world. Stephen hesitated for a moment at the gate, his hand hovering over the intercom panel. It looked almost too ordinary, yet he knew this was the key to uncovering what lay behind it. The feeling that had been building inside him, the curiosity, the need for answers, pushed him forward. He pressed the button, and the soft buzz greeted him. As the gate slowly creaked open, Stephen stepped inside, his breath catching in his throat. The mansion before him was grand, its stone facade both imposing and inviting. It felt as though it had secrets to tell, but only to the right person. He wasn't sure why he had come or what he was expecting, but deep down, he knew this wasn't a coincidence. The kitchen was crowded. He waited patiently, knowing he was about to face the realities of the situation. But deep down, he knew this wasn't a coincidence. He walked up the driveway, his footsteps echoing in the quiet. The air smelled fresh, untouched by the usual hustle and bustle of the city. When he reached the door, it was ajar, as if waiting for him. With a deep breath, Stephen pushed it open, half expecting the door to close behind him, trapping him inside. But instead, he was greeted by a warm, welcoming atmosphere. In the living room sat the elderly woman, the one he had helped on the bus. She was smiling, her eyes lighting up when she saw him. It was as though she had been waiting for this moment. And, in a strange way, Stephen realized that he had been, too. She motioned for him to sit, offering him a seat and a drink, her movements slow but deliberate. Stephen, still taken aback by the turn of events, hesitated for a moment before sitting down. "I knew you'd come," she said softly, her voice filled with gratitude. Stephen couldn't quite understand what she meant. He had come out of curiosity, sure, but he hadn't expected any of this. "The city," she continued, her words calming him, as she explained how she had been looking for someone with kindness in their heart, someone who could help her in her time of need. Her story unfolded in a way that Stephen wasn't prepared for. The woman, who introduced herself as Vivien, had lived a life of wealth and success, but now, at nearly 70, she was alone. Her health was failing, and she needed someone to care for her. She had been looking for a caregiver, But not just anyone. She needed someone who understood what it meant to be compassionate, to offer selfless help without expecting anything in return. Vivien explained that she had seen something in Stephen that she hadn't seen in others. A genuine kindness, a willingness to help without hesitation. That's why she had given him the note, the address, the invitation. She wasn't just offering him a job, she was offering him a chance to change his life. The pay, she explained, would be far more than he could earn elsewhere. It was enough to help him provide for his family, to create the life he had always dreamed of. But more than that, Vivien's offer was an invitation to step into a new world, one where the true value of life was measured by the connections we made with others, by the moments of kindness that changed the course of our lives. Stephen listened intently, his heart beginning to open to the possibility of what lay ahead. He had come looking for answers, and what he found was far more profound than he could have ever imagined. In a world where people often moved too fast, too focused on their own goals, Vivien's invitation was a reminder of the power of kindness, of the incredible things that could happen when we choose to give, not expecting anything in return. As Stephen sat there, processing everything, he realized that this unexpected turn of events had already changed him. The decision he made that day, to listen, to help, to step into the unknown, would shape his life in ways he could never have predicted. And in that moment, he understood. Sometimes, the most unexpected invitations lead us to exactly where we need to be. Stephen Curry never imagined that a simple act of kindness would lead him to a new chapter in his life. When he accepted Vivien's invitation, it was driven by curiosity and a deep-seated belief in helping others. But as the days passed, he realized that this was not just a temporary commitment. It was a role that was slowly transforming him, reshaping his perspective on life, and the raised recognition of his brother, who was often at Horace and Ethan's house to hear of their progress. Vivien, the elderly woman he had helped months earlier, had become more than a client. She had become a mentor, a friend, and a guide in his journey toward a deeper understanding of compassion. At first, the work was exactly as Vivien had described, providing care and companionship. Stephen helped her with daily tasks, grocery shopping, cooking meals, and assisting with her medications. But beyond the practicalities, he noticed something in the way Vivien viewed the world that was beginning to change his own outlook. She never focused on what she had lost in her years of illness or isolation. Instead, she constantly emphasized the importance of connection, of truly seeing the people around you and giving them the respect and care they deserved. Through her wisdom, Stephen began to see the world in a different light. Over time, the bond between them deepened. It wasn't just about helping Vivien, it was about understanding her, connecting on a level that transcended the usual caregiver-patient relationship. They shared stories, laughter, and quiet moments that were, in their own way, more fulfilling than any fast-pacing day on the court. Vivien's encouragement to take time for what mattered, to prioritize relationships over achievements, began to resonate with Stephen. Tremendous confidence was on the way, and it was Vivien's contribution. He realized that his career, although important, had always been centered on himself in many ways, on competition, fame, and the next win. But this new role, this quiet service to someone in need, was teaching him the value of humility, of selfless love. His constant urge to protect his home and to maintain peace with himself had served to protect him. As the months passed, Stephen's role evolved. He wasn't just a caregiver, he became a trusted confidant and an integral part of Vivien's life. She began to rely on him not only for physical help, but for emotional support as well. Their bond grew stronger with each passing day, and Stephen started to see how his presence in Vivien's life had become more than just a job. It had become a calling. There was something deeply fulfilling about helping someone who had so much to teach him. Someone who saw life's smallest moments as treasures, not burdens. Through Vivien, Stephen learned about true patience. He learned that life wasn't always about racing to the next milestone, but about savoring the present, taking the time to understand others, and offering kindness in the quiet moments. This was a side of life he had never fully appreciated before, a side that had nothing to do with basketball, fame, or fortune. It was about human connection, about offering a piece of yourself without expecting anything in return. One afternoon, as they sat together in the living room, Vivien smiled at him. "You've changed, Stephen," she said softly. "You've found something many people never do. True peace. You've learned to be present, not just for others, but for yourself." Her words hit him harder than he expected. He had been so focused on his career and external achievements that he hadn't realized how much he had been missing in terms of personal growth. Vivien had opened his eyes to a whole new world, one that wasn't defined by scores or accolades, but by the depth of the relationships we build. In the months that followed, Stephen's life began to change in ways he hadn't anticipated. He continued his basketball career, but with a renewed sense of balance. His time with Vivien grounded him, reminding him that his worth was not only in what he achieved on the court, but in the way he treated others, in the kindness he extended, and in the relationships he nurtured. His bond with Vivien became a central part of his life, a constant source of strength and inspiration. Ambulances ropes with sound, slowly and carefully, giving breath. The role he had taken on had become more than just a job. It was a transformative experience, teaching him lessons about love, compassion, and the true meaning of success. He realized that sometimes the most meaningful roles are the ones we least expect, the ones that require us to step outside our comfort zone and open our hearts to others, comfortable with the truth, even with the black shadows of sin. And as he watched Vivien's health improve and her spirit flourish, he understood that the greatest gift he could give was not just his time or his help, but his presence. His full, undivided presence. That was the real measure of a life well lived. Stephen Curry had always been a man driven by ambition, focused on basketball, on the thrill of competition, and on winning. But something had shifted in him over the past few months, a subtle change that began when he took on the unexpected role of caring for Vivien, an elderly woman he had helped during a tough time. What started as a simple gesture of kindness slowly began to transform his life in ways he never expected. It wasn't until a particular afternoon, however, that the true depth of this shift revealed itself, a moment that would change everything. Stephen had been spending more time with Vivien, getting to know her in ways he hadn't anticipated. Their conversations ranged from light-hearted stories to deep reflections on life. He'd found himself appreciating the wisdom she shared, her perspective on the importance of human connection, and her remarkable ability to see joy even in the smallest of moments. But on that afternoon, as they sat together in her living room, something unusual happened. Vivien, who had been relatively healthy for the last few weeks, suddenly became quiet. Her eyes lost some of their usual spark, and Stephen could sense that something was wrong. At first, he dismissed it as a passing moment of fatigue. But when he helped her to her feet, Vivien seemed unsteady, her legs trembling beneath her. Panic rose in Stephen's chest as he quickly called for help, his mind racing with questions he couldn't answer. The ambulance arrived minutes later, and Stephen accompanied Vivien to the hospital, his heart heavy with worry. What followed was a whirlwind of tests, doctors' visits, and tense hours in the waiting room. The diagnosis was not what anyone had expected. Vivien's health had deteriorated more rapidly than anticipated. Her condition, though manageable for months, had suddenly taken a serious turn. The doctors explained that her body was simply exhausted and there was little they could do to reverse the damage. Stephen's world felt like it was spinning. Vivien, the woman who had become so integral to his life, was now facing a difficult battle, one he couldn't fight for her. In the days that followed, Stephen found himself reflecting on everything that had happened. He couldn't help but think about how much he had grown over the past few months, how Vivien had taught him not just to be a better person, but to appreciate the fleeting nature of life itself. The twist wasn't just in Vivien's health, it was in how he had found purpose in helping her, in being present for her, in ways he never had been for anyone before. As Vivien's health continued to decline, Stephen found himself making difficult decisions. He had to balance his professional commitments with his new role as her primary caregiver. His team was understanding, but the pull between his career and his dedication to Vivien was challenging. It was in these moments of uncertainty that Stephen realized what truly mattered: being there for someone when they needed it most. This realization, this life-changing twist, was the wake-up call he needed. The lessons he had learned from basketball, hard work, discipline, and perseverance were important, but they were incomplete without the emotional connections and the acts of kindness that gave them meaning. As Vivien's condition worsened, Stephen made a vow to himself that he would never again let success define him in the way it had before. True fulfillment came from the relationships we build and the love we give, not from the trophies or accolades we collect. Presence was humbling and comforting, and Richard brought this wisdom to the safest place on earth. In the end, it wasn't the basketball games or the records that defined Stephen Curry. It was the way he showed up for Vivien, the quiet moments they shared, and the impact of the small acts of kindness that left a lasting mark on his heart. The twist in his life, the unexpected turn of events, had shown him that the greatest victories weren't won on the court, but in the simple, meaningful moments we shared with others. Dishonesty is better than vigilance, he tried to force himself to say, ever so casually, and as he stood by Vivien's side, he knew he had found something far more important than any championship title: a deeper understanding of what it meant to live a life full of purpose, love, and connection.